Hi, folks, and welcome to Walking on the Weene Side. Today I'm giving myself a special treat. I asked the host of It Matters Radio, Monica Brinkman, to come on this portion of the show and interview me because, well, she thinks I've got some worthwhile things to say. And who knows, maybe I do. And as you can see on Monica's side of things, Punky is here with us too, and that's always a special treat for me to see my friend Punky, the radio cat. So Monica, thanks for doing this, and ask away, and I'll try and make sense.
All right, Ken. I first want to let everybody know that, Ken, they see you on the shows.
Yeah.
They might look at your posts and such, but I don't think that people really know, Ken, who you really are inside. And I love this opportunity that we're taking today to get to know you. I just want to let everyone know that I've been friends with Ken for quite a long while, and I can't think of a more outstanding, decent person. And yeah, I know he's blushing a little bit. Hey, Punky wouldn't like Ken if he wasn't like this, let me tell you that right away. But at first I wanted to talk to you, Ken, a little bit about, I'm going to get into you being an author in a little bit, but there's something that you have done that I am absolutely so pleased about. And you have created a website, your own website, and what is it? What is the URL so people can know, Ken?
Oh, it's www.kennethweene.com.
And it's Weene for Weene.
Right.
Now, Ken has taken much time to post some fantastic blogs there and articles and opinions. And I want to get into those a little bit.
Okay.
Because I want people to see, Ken, who you are, the person.
All right. That sounds like fun.
Okay, so let's hit on one of your topics. What is one of the topics that you have discussed in your blog?
Oh, gosh. I think probably the topic I've written most about, because it's one that really speaks to my to my heart, is the issue of race and how I view the relationship between the races. And I'm constantly writing about that. In fact, I just recently finished another essay that I think I'm going to add up on my website about some movies that have come out recently about race. And so that's probably the one topic I'm most aware of. It's not the only topic I care about, but it's the one I'm most aware of.
Many things. But when you say race, Ken, you just don't mean black and white race.
Oh, no. Although that's certainly been the major issue here in America. I'm also very, very aware of Native American peoples, and have, of course, we've had many of topics related to that on It Matters Radio over the years, you and I, and I will be continuing on the Weene side to do that. And we've also, of course, talked about Asian Americans, and we'll be talking more about that. And I guess it could also include Hispanic, even though, that's always such a, the Census Bureau makes so little sense of things anyway. So to me, the issue of race is really, in a sense, it's a bogus issue, because I believe we're all more nearly human than otherwise. That's one of my favorite quotes in the world. It's from a psychiatrist by the name of Harry Stack Sullivan. But even given that, we're so aware, we so overreact, especially in America. We so overreact to the color of people's skin, the way their eyes look, dumb things. as if somehow or other, we don't all have the same emotions, the same needs, the same essential core of humanness.
Yeah, Ken, and that's quite interesting when you bring that up, because when you think about race and the creation of man, or actually the origins of man, if we go back in time, we'll see that people's skin were dictated by where they lived.
Well, yes, and actually there's some new evidence that I was reading the other day about that the early Europeans were probably black. And of course, as you know, I've been working. We finished writing. Now we're trying to find the proper house to publish a memoir of a friend of mine here in Arizona. He is one of the lost boys of South Sudan, who left his home when he was 7. And his story is incredible reading. But anyway, one of that race, of course, is one of the subjects that he and I discussed and wrote about. And one of the things that fascinated me was to learn that there are tribes in sub-Saharan Africa that are very light-skinned. And of course, one of the most fascinating things to me to learn is in the 60s, I learned from a fellow named Malcolm X, if you remember him.
Oh, yes.
That many Arabs were blue-eyed, light-skinned. And of course, we all went, we saw Lawrence of Arabia, and we think of Peter Toole, and how did he pass as an Arab? Well, he passed as an Arab. That kind of complexion would have passed as an Arab quite easily, because that was what Malcolm X, when he went on his Hajj to Mecca, what he discovered is, golly, I'm surrounded by the same range of hues of skin that I find in New York City. And wow, maybe color of skin hasn't got a lot to do with anything. But yeah, clearly we have breeding populations, that occurred for one reason or another. And in fact, one of the genocidal techniques that the Euro-Americans used against Native Americans, for example, the tribes on Long Island, we have these very small tribes, and they would say to the people, well, you can keep your land, your tribal land, and this is before reservations, this is your tribal land, as long as you keep your tribe. But your tribe has to be, your people. Well, now you might have a tribe of 50 people. And if you keep marrying within that tribe, you're going to, it's going to be like the royal families of Europe. You're going to develop hemophilia or something, or the Lithuanian Jewish community with Tay-Sachs. You're going to develop a recessive disorder that will kill you off. And of course, none of these tribes, in fact, did that. They were all interconnected, these small tribes, and they would marry with one another. They weren't racist. They weren't exclusive. But the idea was, by saying, hey, you all got to marry within or you lose your land, the idea was, well, you're going to end up losing your land. And that's what we want, is we want your land. And so, but race is how we play one group off against another. And of course, one of the guests we've had on It Matters Radio, from whom I learned a lot, was a fellow named Gerald Horne, a historian. And he has written extensively about the Revolutionary War and the racial undertones of that. And of course, one of those racial issues had to do with the Native Americans. The British government had blocked expansion of the colonies across the Alleghenies.
Yes.
And, they wanted more land. And part of the reason they wanted more land is, we'll get into in a second, because it's really it makes things even worse. But, we think of George Washington as having all these great pure motives to lead the troops. And I'm sure he had some. But one of his biggest motives was he was a surveyor. And he needed to have that land open so he could make a living, because reality is that in those days it was very hard to make a living as a plantation owner. The South was not economically all that great, so they wanted to keep opening up more land, which brings up another thing. Well, who was going to live in this land? For the most part, it wasn't going to be slaveholders, because the mountains. If you go out across like North Carolina and Virginia, and you get up into the mountains, you realize they're gorgeous. Oh my God, are they beautiful? It's like God has come there to paint this landscape. Forget the south of France and Cézanne. Cézanne should have come to North Carolina and Virginia to paint. But but as beautiful as it is, it's not very good farming country. It's a broody New Englander, the way I talk of myself. One of the things I know is that where there's a lot of rocks and stuff like that, it's pretty hard farming. And
Yes.
But there were lots and lots of people in places like Wales and Scotland and Ireland and the poorer areas of England who wanted just a patch of land for themselves. They had nothing. And so part of the strategy of the people who were developing the colonies and the slave owners was to get these people to come over. Well, why? Why did they want them there? Well, the ratio of black slaves to white slave owners was like 10, 12 to 1. And what's worse is if you figure the nice southern woman who, basically doesn't do much except look beautiful, which is, our notion of the plantations. And sure, they worked more than that. But they really did not, hoe the land and stuff. So when you add in the black slave women, who were hell along stronger, they were used to working. Yeah, the ratio gets really scary. And so there was this fear that there was going to be uprisings. Now, there were some uprisings, of course, that did take place, but the biggest of those uprisings were really not in the States. They had been in Jamaica, which is another part of this whole story. A lot of the slaveholding had been brought to the Carolinas from Jamaica because Jamaica had become so unruly. So, so these people were brought from like Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and they were said, well, you're better than. See, you're not black, you're white. And so they built this great notion of the white as the superior race.
Yeah. When it could have just as easily turned the other way. Yeah.
Well, they could have just said, hey, we need you here because these are slaves and we're afraid of them, and never introduced the color issue. But color was an easy way to do it.
Yeah. An easy way to divide, wasn't it?
And it still is.
Right. Well, Ken, I want to talk some more about this with you, but I think it's time that we should take a break right now, because I want people to see a little bit about Ken, the author, also, and I'm going to give them a sneak peek, and maybe we can come back and talk a little bit more about race and a little bit more about your writing. Okay?
Sounds good.
Ephraim, my neighbor, wasn't much of a musician, but he could pick at a guitar and his voice didn't stray too far off track. That made him good enough for a part-time gig at the Dewdrop Inn. That's where he and I hung out. There must be one of those pun name bars in every town. Some have the extra E to make them sound classy, and some don't. Other than that, they're all pretty much the same. Dumps. This one, it belonged to Sal Marjoni. Had an Irish theme courtesy of some four-leaf clover decals and a sign for Killian's Red, which Sal didn't actually serve. He did make a bad Irish coffee using a tar-like liquid from a seldom cleaned and long overboiled pot topped with Ready Whip. Order a copy of Tales from the Dewdrop Inn, and as Sal would say, enjoys yourself.
Welcome back, folks, to Walking on the Weene Side. I'm Ken Weene, and with me tonight is Monica Brinkman, host of It Matters Radio, and Monica has been kind enough to ask me some questions.
Yeah, and, Ken, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation we just had about race, because I think many people have a false perspective about what really occurred, what actually occurred. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate it so much. And the reason I'm bringing this up, folks, is you just heard Ken have a discussion with us. And, I mean, he could go much more into depth on this.
Oh, I could keep going.
Yeah, if you go to his essays and such, and his blog on his website, you will not only find them very, very, very interesting and enjoyable, but you might learn something while you're there also. And that's one of the reasons I am so happy that Ken has agreed to be on the Weene side tonight. Mm-hmm. Now, we just saw a trailer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did.
And, I love Ken's writing. I probably read all of his books, to tell you the truth. The Dewdrop Inn, though, I can't really say it's is my favorite, because I like many of his writings, but it's one of the most, I would say, characterful ones that I've ever seen, because it takes a special talent to be able to take as many characters you did and bring them to life and have us care about them.
Well, thank you. I care about them, so it was pretty easy to do that, yeah.
Why did you decide to have a setting in a bar?
Well, I wanted to write something about people as family and home, not in the usual blood relation way, but as in connectedness and human connectedness. And of course, the other thing that plays through there, besides that sense of the connectedness of people and the sense of humanity, is a race and difference. And there are Native Americans in the story, there are Hispanics in the story, and there are black people in the story. And the way that comes to matter or not matter. So I wanted that in the book. But that book is a kind of weird book. In a way, in the way I wrote it. One of the things that the outcome of that weirdness is I tend to recommend that book, particularly for men who want to try one of my books, because it ends up being written in short chapters, each of which in itself can stand as a story. Mm-hmm. And so it's ideal. I find that most men really like to read when they're sitting on the toilet. That's their favorite reading.
Yeah, a lot of them do. You're so right about that.
And Dewdrop lends itself to that.
It does.
And of course, it's very heavily, although all the characters are not men, and some of the women carry some very heavy issues in the book, but the protagonists are men. And so I find it a very male kind of friendly book. But anyway, the reason that I wrote it was I was stuck on another project, which becomes the first section of a book called Rudy New Englander. And the first part of that is a novella called The Skylight. Well, I got into this, and I'm writing this story, and it just is beautiful. I mean, I'm blown away by the writing. It's not coming from me. It's coming from a muse someplace. It has to be. But then I get stuck, and I can't keep going. Well, I belong to a writing group, and the writing group I belonged to decided they were going to start a literary magazine. And they said they needed something from me for it because they wanted the people who really made the group close and were intimately involved, each to write something if we could. So I wrote the first chapter of Dewdrop. And, it was supposed to be a standalone short story. Well, they loved it and published it. So then a mutual friend of ours, Sal Butacci, was judging a literary contest, and he asked me to submit something. So I already had the setting and these characters at the Dewdrop, so I wrote another story, which won that contest. I loved it, and by then I was hooked on these people, and I wanted to keep telling their story. And it was great because I could put the other story under the desk for a while and walk away. So I finished writing Dewdrop, sent it to our mutual publisher, All Things Savannah Press. They loved it. Had a great time getting a cover for it, by the way. I ended up doing that rather unusually. And then went back to the Skylight. And so I always think of the Dewdrop as kind of almost an accidental book, except that it really is a fun book. And there are some of the characters you really care about.
Oh, yeah. You do. That's what I was trying to get across to the people, that this is a book. I think women will adore this book also, though, because of the characters that you have in it, how they intermingle. And it's full of surprises, Bones.
Oh, yeah. Because life is full of surprises when you really start having a real relationship with people. Life is filled with surprise.
Right. And I like the fact that, we've been speaking about race today, how you interwove that into the stories, but you do that a lot in your stories, and very subtly sometimes.
Yes. Sometimes the characters, really it doesn't matter what race they are, but sometimes, I use race as a topic, and it becomes part of the story. And my own life has been like that. I started out, I really was not aware of race as a kid, except that I fell in love in middle school, what we call it junior high then, now it's called middle school, with the only black girl in my class. And that really affected me tremendously. To this day, I still think about her. And I was very aware that somehow that was verboten, that was taboo. And it made me angry because I really cared about her. And, but other than that, I really didn't have any meaningful contact or interaction with a person of color until I was driving up north from Florida with some other people. I was 14 or so at the time, and my brother was with me and a few other people. And we were driving up from Florida, and we stopped in the Carolinas. And, well, of course, I covered that in one of those essays you mentioned. But basically what happened was I discovered what segregation was. And by the way, it wasn't, one of the things that really hit me about segregation, it wasn't separate but equal. It was very not equal. And that
it was
made
horrible.
me angry, very angry.
Yeah, and I don't think some people even realize the conditions that many of these people lived in, and maybe still do today. But it's not quite as segregated as it was back then.
No, but there are other kinds of things that go on, like the institutional prejudice that goes on. Like driving while black. I mean, come on, folks. We all know that a black person driving a fancy car is more likely to be stopped than a white person driving a fancy car. And by the way, that the cop doing the stopping can be a black cop. It's built into the way they're trained to think about the world. It isn't because they, as an individual, necessarily have racial prejudice. And that's the worst thing is that we have to deal with it as a part of how our society is functioning, not just simply individuals. In fact, some of the best relationships actually sometimes occur between blacks and members of the Ku Klux Klan. They can have real friendships sometimes because they are at least upfront about what they want in the world, whereas most of us, it's just we're unconscious in what we're doing. We just don't understand how our system is working.
When you write an essay on race, Ken, do you have a certain goal or reason that to write it? And is there anything that you would like the reader to get back when they do read it?
Well, every one of my essays has. And when I write an essay, is always basically an attempt to share something of my life experience from which I hope, and my brain, both combining, in a hope that the reader will then walk away and rethink what they understand about the world and how they are approaching the world. Even something as well as one I've just worked on and I'm hoping to share soon about the movies. It was, I basically looked at some of the movies that have come out about the 50s and 60s because that's our referential time. That's when Grandpa, which is me, Grandpa for the lived. And so these are the stories we're telling. This is how we're framing our world. And I'm trying to say something about that, about those movies, and how we have to look at that framing and how we have to think about that framing in order to use it in a growing way for our society. So yeah, there's always a message. But, isn't that true of any good essay, that we have a message? We want to share some idea. And, I don't just write, by the way. I write about race. I write about other things. Of course, I care tremendously about issues about religion. I care tremendously about the environment, although I usually limit myself to interviewing people on It Matters Radio about the environment, because I'm not that much of an expert, It's funny, I grew up...
But you can still care, yeah.
I did a lot of my growing up in Maine, and of course wrote Broody New Englander that's set there, and I try and share the beauty of New England in that book. But
you capture it well, Ken.
I don't understand the environment, though. Okay? I mean, I did not grow up in a family that valued environment. I remember as a kid that watching my father do something that horrified me as a kid and still horrifies me. There was a porcupine up in an elm tree. We still had elm trees then. And he took out a .22 rifle and shot this poor animal, killed this animal for no reason. In fact, porcupines are actually wonderful animals because they help protect trees. And then another time, and at least this time he got his comeuppance, we had a skunk get into the root cellar. We had a root cellar which we used for storing food. and the foolish man went in there and killed the skunk.
Oh.
And then had to throw out all the food, of course, because the skunk done dead. Well, anyway, that's Broody New Englander, and maybe we can take a break and you could share something about Broody, because it's one of my favorite books.
Yeah, I think we should do that right now, folks. We'll be back in just a little bit.
Hi, folks, and welcome back to Walking on the Weene Side. And Monica, do you have another question for me?
Yeah, Ken, I think this is quite an important question, actually. When you write your books, do you wish them to present some sort of a social issue within the stories?
Yes and no. I mean, I want to write about life as I experience it. In every one of my books, in one sense, is autobiographical. In another sense, of course, none of them are. But every one of them and because it's looking at life, has to raise issues. So, for example, in Widow's Walk, there are religious issues, and also in Widow's Walk, there is the role of the severely handicapped, disabled. In Dewdrop, yeah, it's about alcoholism, but it's also about race and relationship and family. Broody, the Skylight, is very much about different models of existence. When you read it, you find within it there's a science fiction component, and the creatures in that have one life. Then there's the very human component of people living in this small town in Maine. And then there are chickens who are being kept by the protagonist, or one of the protagonists. And so you have these levels, so you can be talking about social issues there. I hope in a very meaningful way. The middle piece on that in that book, Mother's Teat,
Yes.
plural teat, one teat, is obviously about relationship and family, but it's also very much about abusive family relationships. And I think almost everything I write at some point has to have that kind of societal issue built in order for it to work for me. And of course, Memoirs from the Asylum, which we haven't mentioned. Oh, Memoirs, besides being about mental health and illness and what drives people, and suicide. It's very much about suicide, even though there is not a suicide in it. But it's in memorial to a suicide.
Yes.
But it also is about power and about abuse and about choosing. It's very much an existential book. One of my friends who was a philosophy major, after he read it, said, "Ken, I didn't know you were such a strong existentialist." Yeah, I am.
But you didn't think you'd hear that.
Yeah, but I am. So yeah, each of my books at some level, and of course then there's times to try the soul of man. Oh wow, that's about politics and crime and the interfacing of the two. And I mean, if you're looking for a book that's going to make you grit your teeth, that's the book. And I wrote it, very much with that in mind, that there's so much we have to do to confront the venality and even outright evil of the system sometimes. So yeah, there's always something there.
And that's why I treasure you as an author and also as a human being, because there's some people that, and I'm not saying this is wrong, but they just write westerns and they just write romances and they just boom, 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 boom. They do them one right after the other.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, it's a good western, it's a good romance, but they're not taking the time to get real meaning into it, if you know what I mean. It's kind of like a fluff story to me.
And let's be very honest here. You can write. I mean, I happen to write what I call literary fiction mostly, which is a very character and language oriented writing. But you can write romance and have it be meaningful. You can write a Western and have it be meaningful. Heck, I grew up on Western movies. I know movies are not all the same as books, but I mean, if you think about, for example, did you ever watch High Noon?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Well, now High Noon is a very, very powerful social message. By the way, it was written about and aimed at the HUAC and the McCarthy hearings, It's very much about the fear of people to stand up for what's right. And it's a study not just in Gary Cooper's bravado, or actually he's not that brave. He's kind of like, yeah, I don't want to do it, but I got to. But besides that sense of, hey, as a lawman, I have this responsibility. There's all these citizens who back out one at a time until there's nothing left. And yeah, so
that's quite different than some of these. I call them a kind of chapbook.
Yeah.
Romances and westerns, It just takes special talent to be able to, as far as I'm concerned, to interline a story with meaning, but make it fun, make it interesting.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I guess you could call it a special talent. I call it a special curse because my characters insist on it.
Yeah, they just tell you.
Yeah, they do. They really. I mean, I may know how a story's supposed to go, but it doesn't end up being that.
No.
When I wrote Widow's Walk, I really wanted Arnie, who is, and to become Mary's mentor. I wanted a mentor, and instead they end up lovers, and I don't get to choose that. Mary says to me, "Hey, no, I love this guy. I love him."
Yes, something, Ken. That is one of my favorite books that you wrote.
Mm-hmm.
Because you get into many, many controversial issues within that book. But I think the reader doesn't even realize it.
Yep.
Because the characters are so real.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so well written. And I recommend it along with all other Ken's books. And the reason we were having this show tonight, to tell you the truth, is Ken speaks of topics all the time that are meaningful, whether it's within writing, whether it's in blogging, whether it's even writing short stories or flash fiction.
Often, yeah.
And he also takes the time to communicate with other people. And he doesn't get angry. This is something I really want to stress. When Ken post something, let's say on Facebook or one of the social media, or even, a story that he wrote, and someone comes back, even if they're derogatory, with an opposite opinion, even if they're name calling.
Yeah, I try very hard to keep that under control.
And you
ask
do.
people to be civil to one another.
Exactly. And I think that's a great example, Ken, of how people should interact, because everyone's allowed to their own opinion, and you say that to people.
Yeah.
But you also don't back up from what you believe in your heart to be good.
Yes, but if somebody proves me wrong, I will accept that too. I listen.
Yes.
I do invite people, anybody who would like to friend me on Facebook. Please do. Please follow me. Please do take part. And I'll tell you something. One of the things I have not filled my quota on Facebook yet, but I will eventually, I hope. And when I do, I'm going to use another email, open another account. But I'm not going to have an author's page. And one of the reasons I don't want to have an author's page is I want to have dialogue with people. I think talking to one another just is such an important part of life. That's why I love doing It Matters Radio with you. That's why I love interviewing people for the show. That's why I love, being part of so many things on the social media, and why here in my home base of Phoenix I'm so active in different groups and organizations and activities, because I believe, somebody said it, if people are talking, they can't be fighting.
It's true.
I mean, we may disagree, but we're not resorting to picking up bricks and things and throwing them at one another.
Right.
And so, to me, communicating and having discourse and sharing is so important. And of course, you and I have of course been posting all over the social media, and we'll say it again here, that I love to have people contact me either through my website or by contacting It Matters Radio. Mm-hmm. And if they'd like to come on Walking on the Weene Side and discuss a topic, as long as you have some basis for what you want to say, that you have, it doesn't have to be a formal academic degree or having published a book, but you have to have, some credibility, obviously, if you want people to listen to you. But I'd love to have people, and please, anyone who wants to do that, contact us. And because we want to share ideas, we want people talking with one another.
Yeah, it's the only way to go. And Ken, thank you for allowing me to interview you. I had the privilege to do that.
Thank you very much for doing it, Monica. And folks, I do want to remind you, this is the spoken word section of It Matters Radio. Walking on the Weene Side is the spoken word section.
Yes.
But It Matters Radio broadcasts all week long with music. And even occasionally I cross over and do a music show, especially if it's something that's up my alley, like, opera, classical music, things like that. I'll even sometimes suggest a show, because on Sunday we do
the musical guest,
a focused guest show, and the rest of the week Monica brings you all kinds of wonderful music, and all that's on podcast too. So hey, if you miss a show, just go on to the It Matters Radio section of iTunes. YouTube, I'm sorry. I always mix those up. YouTube. And catch the music. And and on Fridays, there's a special show, isn't there?
We actually have a special show Friday and Saturday.
Uh-huh.
Friday, we have the top 20 Euro indie music chart. And then on Saturday, we have the top 10 music chart. So people can vote for their favorites and then find out if they make it to the top. So, just check out our Facebook page and you'll learn a lot about that.
Yeah.
And you can also find Walking on the Weene Side in our podcast and our YouTube channel, It Matters Radio playlist. And it's named Walking on the Weene Side. So I hope you share those also.
Yes, that's a big thing. Please do share with others and tell them about It Matters Radio. Yes, talking about Walking on the Weene Side, please tell them about that, but also tell them about the whole wonderful range of stuff we do on It Matters Radio.
And we do it out of love, huh, Ken?
Absolutely. And thank you so much again, Monica, for joining me and Walking on the Weene Side.
Thank you, Ken.